So that's why I thought maybe just today, just only kind of biblical framework about it, and a little bit church history, how it came to be to us. Yeah. And I even prepared some slides, which I did today with artificial intelligence. So I put just my notes there. I also uploaded my book there and said, please create out of that some slides. And I adjusted it also a little bit, but it was quite good, I think. So it's helpful. So let me share my screen. Okay, so yes, it's also a kind of a disclaimer. It's just based on what I've wrote. What I found out is not like the whole, objective. But I think I tried to summarize a lot of things which I figure out. So yes, the first, yeah, indeed, the framework. I think where it becomes effective, the idea of separation from God within our evangelical framework, this idea of okay, how the narrative of separation from God came to be, or how we tell the story, right? Which is kind of a very common story, which starts with God created everything good, humans then messed up, and then because God is holy, God is good, he cannot be associated with sin, a separation needs to be there. Or depending on where you came it, your particular denomination, maybe how it was taught, more about righteousness of God. Yeah. The righteousness cannot be associated with unrighteousness. That would be not right, right? So that's why a separation then needs to be there. Or basically the biblical terms of light and darkness cannot be mixed up together. That's why clearly the separation needs to be there. And the story goes further that the salvation is that through Christ we have the gift of salvation, right? That we will be a rescue from this separation from God for eternity. So we can take this gift, and then this danger of this separation, which is kind of per default, is there because we all are sinners. That can be then solved by, if we would become Christians and followers of Jesus. So what the question is this the narrative which we can derive from the Bible itself, from the context, how it came to be, or it is rather an illusion? And how can we read these topics? So what I did is basically I just looked into some of the, I would say for me, it was like pillars on the basis of which this particular narrative was situated in the Bible. So I looked into these verses, these passages, and figure out, okay, how do they look like? For example, the first one, of course, is the fall. Yeah, that's the story that sin caused separation from God because Adam and Eve sinned and they were banned from the Garden of Eden, and that was the separation. Now, clear case, that was the case. Not together with God anymore, but actually that was not the case, really, if you would read the whole story and the rest of the Bible. Because right after they sinned, God gives them better clothing. He spoke to them. He is addressing, where are you, right? Um, after them, also to Cain, he speaks again, and he protects the Cain and protects all the others, and on it goes until now, until the end of the story, until in the Bible at least, where God always with people and participates, and they run away, but he's chasing them. So it's actually the consequence of the, so to say, fall, which is also a very questionable term. If you look in the Hebrew Bible and the tradition, the consequence was not the separation from God, but the consequence was that they were not be able to eat from the tree of life. So that was the consequence. And also other consequences about the work and childbirth, what we read there, right? But the consequence was not God is then abandoning them and they are separated from him. It's not in the story. We need to read it into this story to have it as a narrative, which was done and which we did, which was kind of normal for us. So it's doable if we want. But if you look at the story just with a first eyes, I would say it's hard. It's problematic to do that. Yeah. Next one. This was particular one which I myself used to teach within our church a lot, and people got confirmed and baptized, and because this was very clear verse in the Bible in Isaiah 59, that there is a separation, that sin separates us from God. So it says here, your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God. Clear, right? Black and white. So you see in this picture, that's the documentary picture of that time, that 3,000 years ago, they do this picture already. And so there is a wall between the sinner and the God. And God's hands are bound, so he cannot do anything because, hey, sin separates from God. But let's look into the story itself, the context. So if you read Isaiah 58 and 59 together, what's the context of all of that? The context is that God is kind of through the prophet Isaiah speak to the people of Israel that they are basically hypocrites. They don't follow the justice, what they need to do, but the blood is on their hands. And God, and they still want God to protect them, and they do their sacrifices. But God says, no, this is not what I want from you. I want from you justice. And you do the hypocritical deeds. That's why I will not hear from. That's why these iniquities separate you from me. So it's not as a statement of the teaching of all eternity that God separates from us because of the sins forever. Because in the same chapter, 59, God helps them again and promise for the future even more help. But also the whole framework is not about the teaching of how ontologically it really works between us and God. It's a relationship, it's situation there, but he addresses that what they're doing, that's not what's on his mind, what they cannot count on him, that he will protect them because of their behavior. So this is like, that's why I took this picture. It's like in a family, this boy who is really upset on his mom because, I mean, he washed the hands and she doesn't give him the dessert. But mom said to him, well, as we talked about many times, if you hit your sister, you will not get a dessert. So this is actually what happens in this particular Isaiah 59 between God and his children. And it is not, okay, this is God saying, see, the sin separates you eternally from me. That's why you need to come to me and then you will not separate it anymore. So that's one of the verses really which I was in my mind always referring to, and was kind of, wow, a very good verse to preach about to others. The other thing is very often is also the question is, well, but this idea of that God, the holy God, cannot be associated with sin. He can even not look at sin because he's holy. And one of the verses for that, which will be often taken, is in Habakkuk 1:13, and not even one verse, but the first half of the verse. So the Habakkuk 1:13 says, "You who are of pure eyes, than to see evil." So it's can continue like you cannot see evil because you cannot be associated, but this is not how the verse ends. It ends with, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent. So it actually says the opposite. He looks at traitors. And that's kind of exactly the idea. You see God, you see the bad stuff happen, unrighteousness happening. Why don't you do anything about it? So also again, not this verse you could try to use as a proof that God, because of his holiness, cannot look at sin. That's why he cannot have the communion with you if you're a sinner. That's why how it's often translated, but this is not what the verse is saying. Yeah. Then what often also will be done is the famous cry out from Jesus when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" There is a whole big story behind it, which many of us hear, which is then means, look, that's clearly the proof that sin separates us from God, because why then else needed Jesus to die? You see, on the cross, that's exactly where it's happening, actually, that because he takes your sin on his shoulders and sin separates him from God, now God is abandoning Jesus because sin separates from God. And that's what I mean. I use that. It's very, very common in many, many circles to use this word this way. So if you look at this verse is the citation of Psalm 22. So that's where Jesus is quoting the Psalm 22 on the cross. Yeah, and exactly this Psalm 22 addresses the cry out of the one who is punishing, will be punished. And he says, on the right side, he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried. So you could argue, well, yes, when he cried, maybe that's where maybe God was still here with him, but then when he died, that's where but no. You said, why you forsaken me? He's cry out. And you told that's where God is abandoning him. And in the same psalm he's quoting, he says, God didn't hid his face from him when he cried out. So if you want to use the actual analogy in the Bible, then use it, and then you see, no, that is not happening, not God abandoning him. Actually, the opposite. Yes, and Jesus says himself in John, if you would look at that, is that I'm not alone, for the Father is with me. For he's talking about his crucifixion, which is in front of him. So what do we see then? And this is what I like actually to say. If people say, "Wow, but you cannot say that sin is not separating us from God," there are so many verses, right? And I said, no, you're right. Actually, yes, in a sense, sin is something which does the separation. Yes, but the question is, where is the separation happening? Is this between God and us, that he cannot associate with us as sinners, and then he is leaving us forever if we will not, come up with him? Or is it our blindness? Is it our alienation that we don't see God? Just like Adam didn't see and hid himself from God. And he was thinking, oh, I need to hid myself from him. Oh, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so and this is what we see actually interesting wise in the Bible. So we see this is again and again what especially in the New Testament, what Paul is addressing when he says they are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God. Yeah, this alienation is happening. Where does it happen? You who once were alienated and hostile in mind. And he continues. So this is again and again, it's not that often, but this is what happens when Paul is talking about it. And also, what's interesting, when he was asked in front of the King Agrippa in Acts 26, so yeah, what are you doing? And then he explains himself, his mission. He says about his interaction with Jesus' appearance, what was his mission? Because Jesus is told him, and mission was not, well, preach to them that they are separated from God, that they will be then together once they will be confirming to this belief. No, he preached, that was his commandment, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light. So not bring people somewhere where they have the belief, but to open their eyes to see what light is, what God is, what reality is. And this is, I think, it's really it resonates to me now, because basically this is the I mean, real issue which we have, because we are blind to so many things, and mostly the issues which we cause as people is, I think, through things which we think it's good, we have good intentions, but we are blind to what is really causing in the end, and this bring damage. Even suicide terrorist thinks he's doing something good. And this is to see the reality as it is, to see the consequences, to see how can we, in this complexity of life, act and react. This is a real issue, and this is wonderful that we can see some guidance and look at love, look at God, look at Jesus. And Jesus himself then also talks about blindness and light a lot. Yeah, he said, there's just two here. He says in Luke 4, he has sent me a recovery of sight to the blind. And famously, he says, hanging on the cross, they don't know what they're doing. He doesn't say, okay, oh, they need to do the right thing. He says that's the issue. They don't know what they're doing. They're crucifying their God who is coming to them. And in that sense, is this topic of darkness, light and darkness, which I was trained to think about separation from God, to train about danger of, slippery slope of this darkness. But in that sense, in the picture, the darkness is actually inability to see. That's what darkness is. And that's where the absence is from God, because we cannot, he's there, but we cannot see. And then what's really interesting, if we now zoom out from it and look at the Hebrew Bible and then look at New Testament, actually the bigger frame within the traditions is interestingly wise, is within the Hebrew tradition, there is a big frame of the shalom idea, which is connected to the creation and our relationship with God. Is basically, the idea is that the harmony in which God created the world, which everything was good. Yes, it was distracted by sin, but that was not the beginning of our relationship with God. The beginning was not Genesis 3. The beginning was Genesis 1, where he created us in his image, in this tradition, and where he gave us all the good and all that very good. And Genesis 3 is also not the end of our story, where God is restoring, pushing and making this trajectory of restoration. So in my view, I was trained in the idea, okay, actually that's the story. Genesis 3. Yeah. That was the beginning of the story, all the issues and sinful nature, and we need to be rescued, and that's what it is about. But if you look at the broader picture, actually, that's not what it is about. And that's a big difference. So what's actually the issue and how we look at our world? So the goal isn't yet, it's not the removal of this guilt so that we will be then saved from the separation, but the goal is the healing of creation into God's order, how he actually wanted it to be, the harmony between us and nature and each other, and between us and God. And also in New Testament, we see this frame again and again. Also, when Paul is addressing that, he's even using Greek philosophy and their philosophers, what they're saying, and says, look, even you see that in him we live and move and have our being. And in Colossians, we see that, we say in Ephesians as well, in him all things hold together. So if that's the case, if that's the bigger picture of Hebrew, the shalom, which will be restored, and in New Testament, the embodiment of we are in God, that gives a completely different bigger picture of what actually the issue is and how we relate to God and what's about separation from God. It's actually not possible. This is holding all things together, all creation. It's just not feasible. We are not strong enough to make him separated from us because we are in him in that picture. So, and how it came to be that we have this historically kind of the idea of the separation from God. That was very interesting to figure out historically. So yeah, exactly. This is the the actual thing is kind of there was a big merge and mix of the Greek philosophy about the separation of the gods, of the perfect, from the matter and from the imperfect humans. And this was merged mostly in a thought. And can you hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You're back.
It was interesting to see how it came to be because it was not like a evil spirit. So, oh, let's be like make a conspiracy and mix them together so that it will be then, something bad. No, it was a need there at that time in the Hellenistic world to explain to the common Greeks and the people in the Palestine to explain this Jewish tradition in their terms, on their terms, to make them understand. And this at that time kind of fulfilled the need for them. Yeah, basically, this is what has happened concretely within Christianity. So, a fourth, fifth century, where it was merged from the more Platonic, Neoplatonic streams through particularly actually Western church. So in our case, it's our our heritage from the Christian tradition. In the Eastern Church, I know it also from Russia because I have Russian heritage as myself. I was in Russia until I was 18. They don't have some other parts of that. They don't have this particular way of looking at separation from God because of our original sin, interesting wise. So even within Christian traditions, there are different ways. That's why this becomes more clear how it came to be at that time through the mixing of the Neoplatonic way of thinking and merge them with Christianity. So this ontological gap between the gods and the earthniks, so the people, was merged, but in a particular way. So down below, I wrote this way: unlike in Greek mythology, Christianity did not see this gap, as something natural, but as a result of human sin and the fall from grace. So that's this mix which would happen there. And if I look at this through just like abstract pictures, this is actually how it looked like, the difference. So this is the way we look at us and God through this lens of the kind of default way that we are separated from God. So we are as human being, humanity in a fallen world. This is kind of as a given, that's where we live in. And we are per default actually separate from God. And we need to be connected through Him, through Jesus. And that's where connection comes. So it needs to be something there. But then if we look at what we saw in this bigger picture framework of the Hebrew Bible, of the Shalom idea, and this the idea of the we in Christ everything is held together, it looks different. So if that would be kind of, I've stolen this from the Australian theologian and psychologist, I think. What was it? Bruce Wackup,
Walk-up.
his name? Wackup?
Mm.
Yeah. Thanks, Gertraud. So we know him, both of us. So
Mm.
I thought that's beautiful. This picture is very speaking to me. It makes me more tangible. So if this would be kind of these dots of, if you could picture God, right? Of course, you cannot grasp him. That's with not only the dots, not the line, okay? But where are we then situated in this framework of Hebrew Bible and of the New Testament in that case? We are within God, inside of God. It's like in the womb of God. And this is the humanity as God's creation in God. That's the, that's how he created us. And this small square of humanity in a foreign world, yes, sure, there is also a truth to it. There is a lot of broken things which happens, and we are blind to things, we don't see it, but we still are in God. And that's a big difference to this picture. We need to come to somewhere to be with God. Otherwise, per default, we're actually separated from here. This is where we don't have the separation. This is where we need to be healed from the blindness. Because God never left us, but we perceived this as if He would be leaving us. We perceive it as He would be abandoning or punishing us, just like Adam did. Yeah. And that's why, yeah, that would be the resume from exempt from this, is that separation, it's an illusion, and it's a bad illusion. We are not separated, but we are blinded to what truth is, and that's the way he wants to heal us. Not divine abandonment, but dark inside that needs healing. So that's the framework which I come through proving of these verses, which I used to use, and then through looking at a broader picture within the bubble of the Christian tradition, within the Bible, and within even in inerrancy. That's what's I think helpful. Start really very, very there, and then go further steps. But even there, it's maybe helpful to myself to be honest, to be loyal to even my past self, to my past Vlad, who can now integrate my former beliefs through my loyalty to myself and be more at one with myself, because even within the framework I used to live in, within there, if it is possible to see differently than I used to look at it. Yeah, that's it.